Shanker, thanks for being with us on LBC News.
Good morning.
What do you think the UK, and for that matter the European Union, will do in response to Donald Trump's 25%?
Well, I think you're probably going to see two different reactions from the EU and from the UK. So it's not a big surprise, the auto tariff. He's been communicating this for some time. It will take effect from April, somewhere between April the 3rd and May the 3rd. And essentially there have been a series of tariffs, we know. Some of them have been for non-trade things like fentanyl in Mexico and Canada, and some of them are part of this unfair trade reciprocal tariff process, and that's going to land on April the 2nd, on Wednesday. And that will go to the president's desk, and you can expect on Wednesday to have more announcements of many more tariffs, certainly big tariffs on the EU and China. Probably most of the G7 countries, at least, certainly possibly G20, will get their share of tariffs. The European Union has said quite clearly they will retaliate. They've got a list of products that they usually retaliate on, things like Levi jeans and bourbon and that kind of thing. The idea of that is to try to get the US administration to change. Now, I think that's quite unlikely. It's certainly not likely if the UK were to retaliate. So I don't think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see from the UK an attempt to get some sort of trade deal, or start the negotiation at least of a trade deal, so that they can avoid those tariffs.
Right. And in terms of the European Union, it's interesting to hear you say it's not going to work. Of course it's not going to work. There's no way that the European Union is going to introduce any kind of retaliation that's going to make Donald Trump go, oh, well, of course, if you're going to do that, then, you know, the deal, the whole thing's off. That's literally not going to happen. So why are they bothering?
Well, it's a good question, because, I mean, traditionally, the way retaliation works is, you know, you target particular members of Congress's districts in order to get them to lobby the president. It's very early in the cycle. No member of Congress is going to do that. If they were closer to the midterms, then maybe that would work. I also think that the EU could do a different kind of tariff exercise, essentially saying to the president, look, we get that you're concerned about, you know, not only trade issues, but also regulatory issues, regulatory barriers that we have, and property rights protection barriers that we have, and so on. But you have a lot of barriers in the US that are along those lines, and here are the products that we're going to use, and that would start the process of a deal. And Trump is nothing if he's not a deal maker. And I think what countries need to do in responding to the US tariff is to look at what is the landing zone for a deal here that we could have with the US. And that would be a productive, I think, thing to do.
I was talking to a car manufacturer in France this week. Admittedly, she's in a very particular position where she makes cars in France, nearly all of which are exported to the US. She says, why don't the European Union take their own tariffs off? That's all Trump wants.
Well, that's a very good point. He wants a little bit more than that. I mean, it's not just the tariff, which is much higher in the EU. It's also, there's a series of, particularly in the auto sector, regulatory barriers. Now, none of this is going to be a surprise. When the document lands on Wednesday, it will basically be very similar to all of the previous what's called national trade estimate, which is the US's, every year they do an inventory of foreign country trade barriers. So it's well known what the problems are. And I think if countries make a good faith effort you don't have to solve every problem that appears in your sort of entry in this document, but you have to look like you're making a good faith effort to solve some of them. And I think and you've actually already seen that from the EU and from the UK, in fact, and also from other countries like India and so on, the little sort of overtures about, we might be able to change some of these things. That's of course what he wants. And he is a deal maker, and I think there are deals to be done. And what the tariff that's imposed on April the 2nd will be accompanied with is, some sort of deal plan or deal idea or heads of terms or whatever that countries can look at and decide if they want to sign up to these things.
If they don't, the other thing that Trump says he wants to avoid just putting prices of everything up for US consumers is more and more companies to relocate production to the US. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, in some sectors, that can happen, and I certainly think there will be some. relocation of manufacturing. I mean, clearly in boardrooms around the world, the only thing that you know with certainty is that if you're in the US, you're not going to have to worry about any kind of tariff. So that will happen to some extent, but there are some, for some industries, that's actually very difficult to do. So the car industry is actually a case in point. There are literally millions of components, and to move a supply chain entirely into the US is very difficult. So particularly for the UK car industry, that's going to be very difficult. His target, though, is primarily, it's actually to move a lot of production and a lot of the supply chain of the US manufacturers and people like General Motors and Chrysler and so on from, some of the plants they have in Canada and Mexico back into the US. So in fact, if you look at this tariff with regard to the US industry in Canada and Mexico, he's saying, I'm going to apply a tariff, but it's only going to be on the non-US component parts. So he's trying to force, and the primary goal here is not so much to attack the German industry or the British industry. It's really to make the US industry pull more of its supply chain back into the US.
Shanker, thank you very much indeed for that. Shanker Singham.